For the first time in my life, I'm truly free to see the clear-cut forest for the poison sea, to see the waters occupy the shores of Jersey, and I feel alive.
All right. Hi. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing good. Coming at you at a really nice 9 a.m.
9 a.m. Yeah. Because we gotta do that work.
Oh,
Anyway,
my grandson.
always. My name's Eris, and welcome to Calfire Crackpots. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that we got a little into at the end of last week's episode, which is climate change versus American individualism.
Yeah. So exactly how does climate change interact with industry?
What I'm more wondering is how do I have these big ass SUVs here? And how do they factor into climate change being a problem and the responsibility that you have in the fight against climate change? Because it's all well and good to say um, industry is causing climate change, but who exactly is supporting that industry?
Yeah.
You are. There's not generally, unless you're a crypto miner, there's not just someone emitting carbon dioxide for the sake of emitting carbon dioxide. It's happening usually for a reason.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that.
Transportation, food, you know.
But first, we've got some news.
Mm-hmm.
The news being that of the climate change summit, so the UN conference climate change conference thing, UK 2021. You'd be forgiven for honestly not knowing it was happening. But literally pretty much everyone was there. It's COP26, and Joey B was there. I'm sorry, Brandon was there. Um, Boris Johnson, pretty much every one of the top climate emitting countries except China. Mr.
Yeah.
Xi was apparently feeling unwell or probably just didn't want to go, but he did send some people there. But so the meeting that took place last week was a big hand wavy doomsday conference of a bunch of world leaders. And it's a step in the right direction. It's not perfect, but countries getting together for diplomacy is definitely a step in the right direction. But the problem is there's very few members of the global south, so South America, Africa, Oceania, who attended and can attend because they're the ones who are most likely to see the worst effects of climate change first. So small island nations are going to be gone in a matter of decades. Countries like Bangladesh that are basically just a huge river delta, like only a few feet above sea level. So that's all a huge problem, the fact that they're not there. But what really matters is what's happening now. This photo didn't make any sense to me. So it's Joe Biden and the Pope in front of a traffic green screen.
When I was going through the slides, I honestly thought that was just a doctored photo you had made.
No.
Is that a wow, you just picked that up?
I did. I love how the Pope just like no matter where he is, he just looks like he doesn't know what's going on.
He looks like he needs a ride home.
He does.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is more of our familiar faces who is here. So we have Jair Bolsonaro, Pope France, Xi Jinping. He wasn't there.
Yeah.
Everyone's favorite, Greta Thunberg.
I don't know.
And
has it really been figured out why conservatives hate Greta Thunberg so much?
so here's my theory. I was gonna get into this, but now is a good time. So she was at this conference that she lambasted for it being a bunch of old white people and saying that this wasn't the correct way to fight climate change. Which is kind of true, but my
True,
my
but you gotta start somewhere.
exactly, and my kind of one criticism is that although I do credit her for kind of enlisting me and many more young people in the fight against climate change, I will argue that for every one of me or you, there is one or possibly and more likely more than one person, probably young person, who's seen her kind of like talking down like an affluent person from the West talking down to poor African world leaders, saying that you aren't doing the right things and then just constantly lambasting world leaders has kind of turned a lot of people off the fight against climate change and just dismissing it as what privileged kids who don't have enough to think about worry about.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's tough because you really do have to start somewhere,
uh,
and all progress is good progress.
yeah, it's impossible to have bad progress against climate change, but you kind of need to see where you're coming from. So what me, Greta, probably you two, and a lot of other people want is complete restructuring of the global economy instantly. But that's never going to happen. So there's three schools of thought. We can either keep hoping for this, which is never going to happen, or we can just sit back and watch as the world burns, which nothing happens either way, or we can kind of take going a bit over the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming cap and actually have long-term change. Because again, you got to start somewhere if you want to get nowhere. You can't pull everyone to one side and expect something to happen.
Yeah, a lot of the climate change advertisement so far has just been foreboding warnings about the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit.
We're gonna pass that up. There's a graph that shows what would need to happen for humanity to stop warming beyond 1.5 degrees, and there was a window, probably it was probably between like 1980 when people were like the first scientists were kind of saying, hey, global warming could be a problem, and now, and it's I should have put it on here, but it's like different slopes that show action starting at different years, and before, it's a gradual line, like very gradual slope, and then it gradually gets steeper and steeper and steeper. It's basically a vertical line down at this point. Um, it's far more likely, is according to that UN paper, probably seeing 2 degrees of warming, and if it's 2 degrees of warming, that means that it's actually reversed versus things just keep going up and we keep hoping that we'll make it to 1.5.
Yeah.
But I digress. I'm getting off topic a bit here, but this slide is about private capital versus climate change. So complete restructuring of the economy, although good, is probably not going to happen. So the private sector, however bad it is, needs to be involved in the fight against climate change. But so a couple people who were speaking at this conference, some big execs, Helen Mountford, a senior climate change expert at the World Resources Institute think tank, whatever. So financial institutions that were in total managing about $130 trillion in assets, which is a little less than twice the global GDP, have some type of net zero pledge. Net zero is a little bit of a shaky ground, as we'll get into, but around the world, so 35.3 trillion was invested in sustainable funds at the start of 2020. That accounted for 36 out of every 100 invested dollars, and everything from like direct projects to refusing to buy shares of polluting companies. But it is growing because 4 years earlier, it was only 28 out of every $100. So this is change in the right direction. At this conference, although not entirely what we need, like big hand wavy gestures where like Joe Biden might have fallen asleep partway through. Did you see that video?
Yeah, I did. That's just ugh.
Yeah, hard to say.
That's our president.
It is our president. Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly better than the alternative.
Which is nothing to be done.
Yes. A president, because my logic was, okay, no man rules alone. It's his cabinet who's really calling the shots, and it always is. Even during Trump, Trump's cabinet was the one who was really calling the shots because he didn't know politics.
Yeah, it's
And
you know,
I'm
like
glad that Biden chose a experienced and supportive cabinet because that's what really matters.
it's so crazy that there's so much impact put behind the president when really the most important decision they make in their entire term is just deciding their cabinet.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can't expect one person to know about all those issues. You need to split it up.
Yeah.
But what's the deal with Americans? Who are we?
Who are we?
We
Where
are
are we?
we're hated by Reddit. That's all I know.
Yep. We are hated by a great many nations of the world.
We are. We're too good. That's the problem. But I want to know how many of those countries have been to the moon.
How many? Probably not as many.
Yeah, have you been to the moon?
I personally haven't, but I can
No, no,
attest
no.
that some
No,
people
Europe.
I know have.
Have Europe? They been to the moon? No, they haven't. America #1, baby. Yeah,
Yeah.
America may be a mess, but it's my mess.
Why are other countries starting space programs right now? That's
It's a good question.
probably so they can get their own satellites.
Satellites are the big thing. I mean, the US gives everyone like free GPS anyway, but like
Yeah.
probably want,
They probably
oil
want their
tech.
own.
Yeah.
China's China, India's India.
India
it
is
reflects a
India.
certain way on your country if you're using the United States satellite power.
Yeah, and it's also kind of a national security risk. Like the US could just cut
Yeah.
you off at any time. But as we were kind of discussing earlier, what is the reality of micro level change? So we had this graph earlier in our second episode about climate change. If you look at some of these, like road transportation, 11.9%. That is the single largest category. Residential buildings, the second largest category. These are all things that are easily controlled by an individual. Some of these, like chemicals, cement, crop burning, iron and steel. Yeah, they're big categories kind of related to you, but they're big categories that you don't have much control over.
Yeah.
And with the US having the highest greenhouse gas per capita of like heavily developed countries, that's kind of an issue. So China, I gets most of the flack for being the highest carbon emitter, which it is. But if the US had as many people as China, it would way surpass it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the US may only have a third of the population of China, but it's emitting about twice as much per capita. So it can still say, hey, China, cut down on your emissions.
You have a problem about people always push a lot of the blame of climate emissions to China, but really, like, who has been buying products that are made in China? Who has been depending on an industry that's been built up there of factories and cheap labor?
Yeah, and that's why the discussion over Buy American isn't necessarily a partisan one. It's for national security because, literally all of the time, like drugs manufactured who knows where suddenly get like the FDA says, no, wait, this causes cancer. And, lithium mining in the US would stimulate the economy. So it's things that both parties want. And it's not as partisan as people make it out to be a lot of the time.
The most important thing about buying American is the standards that we have in America that might not be as high in other countries. And one of those is,
Safety.
wages.
Mm-hmm.
We pay a good amount compared to pretty much every other manufacturing country.
So remember when Matthew Iglesias, after that Bangladesh factory explosion that like killed a bunch of people,
Mhm.
he published an article that said different countries have different labor standards and that's safety standards and that's okay.
That's not okay.
It's not okay. He also wrote a book that like he wanted America to increase its population to 1 billion. I think that's the worst thing for the world.
What would be the end game of having 1 billion Americans?
He
running
wanted to
around?
compete with China.
That's such a vain argument.
I mean, we already do compete with China with a third of the population, but like,
It's so vain to think
yeah, like you
we
shouldn't.
need to compete with this industry.
Yeah, how
and-
about we work together with China on mutual interests like climate change?
Yeah.
Because like it or not, China has, it may seem like a pretty foreign place, but it has a lot of the same stuff. It's got big forests, it's got like glacier plains, it's got all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Some of the most beautiful areas of the world are in China. But
It is.
I mean, not a lot of people know because China's main export now is like shitty Amazon things that ship to your house in a day and a half.
Oh God. The future does not include 1-day shipping.
The future does not include 1-day shipping. I
It
totally
doesn't.
agree.
The future is barges. So this is the classic American spirit. I found this picture online. I've seen it before, But I don't know if any of you lads in Europe have this, but like it's this window that can tilt upwards and downwards. And the comments was just, this puzzle confuses and enrages the Americans.
So insane. Why would you need a window that opens any way other than sideways?
I've been trying to figure out how this works. I see like latches down there.
It's got a retractable pin, like a steel pin, and that's what becomes the hinge on either side.
So what if I have it halfway between this position and this position? Will the window
It won't
just
move in
fall out?
either.
How do you know that?
Either both pins are going to be in or both pins are going to be out.
They're both out. The window falls out.
Yeah. So it either falls out or it stays in.
So, for those of you who don't know, Quora is basically righty wet Reddit. And I actually did find this picture on Quora. That's all I
Quora
need.
is such a good website.
That's all I need to say. It's good for a few laughs, but like you kind of wonder, this is pure degeneracy. But
Go on
just some
Quora to ask way too important questions.
yes. But just some like weird quirks we have about us Americans. So we require more personal space than in some other cultures. Okay, I buy that. Much more assertive. A lot more holidays. But these are the most important. It's that we're highly individualistic with a strong distaste for government overreach. So Americans are extremely sensitive to any form of government overreach. Both sides. I'm sure we can all agree that if something that has injustice happens, Americans aren't afraid to go out in the streets and protest it. And that's
Yeah.
something that a lot of people take for granted. You can get black bagged and killed for that in some places. And, you know,
Freedom to assemble is a great thing.
yeah. And, you know, some of the stuff that happened last summer that might have actually happened.
Yeah.
But one of the kind of tenets of American culture, and a lot of people kind of take it as a vulnerability, is that we expect a fair deal. So when we do something or when we give up something, we expect to be compensated in return. And, you know, some people might think of that as kind of childish, but I consider it a virtue in that you're not pushed around.
Yeah. Assertiveness is always a good quality, unless it turns into
International,
commandiness.
being the policeman of the world. So I digress. We got corporate America's blame game. So this is an interesting graph. And so we got two axes. We have policy engagement activity. So how much are they saying, rah, rah, climate change, we're solving it. And then the other axis is how much are they actually supporting climate policy. So of course on the low end where they have high engagement but low support is BP, Shell, Exxon, Chevron, Southern Company. So obviously your usual
Mhm.
suspects. And then you go down, you have Dow Chemical. Dow Chemical is just like such a massive company and they get so much flack for it. They basically invented plastic.
Yeah.
In a way, if not them, it was someone else, but that's not an excuse at the same time.
It really isn't an excuse. Polymer engineering is such a, how to describe it? At the time plastic was made, there were a lot of different developments being made into the same sort of invention.
Yeah,
Whoever made it first was just a lucky guess
like
on
I'm
whoever
sure
was going to
since
make the most structurally sound one.
I'm sure since like hundreds of years ago, like random chemists have been like throwing out plastics that they've accidentally made as like lab waste.
Yeah. And sometimes they were unstable, or other times they held the liquid they were made in.
Made the
But
world's best
then-
nylon in 1630.
yeah,
Wasn't nylon the first one?
I do believe nylon was the first one.
Nylon was the first and the best. Nylon is such an S tier plastic. Except if you 3D print with it without a fume hood, it gives you cancer.
A lot of things give you cancer. I think that
That's
can be
true.
shrugged off.
Yeah, pretty much everything gives you cancer. If it has a Prop 65 warning on it, don't buy it.
Yeah.
So then you go up, and then you see the true climate policy leaders. Nestle's on there, interestingly. Despite what Reddit would have you believe, Nestle has cleaned up its act a lot in recent years. but it still is not a very good company. And then you have Tesla, Apple, IKEA, Unilever. So they're companies that, although they're doing a lot of ecological damage, that's mainly a product of them being so big.
Yeah.
IKEA, for example, uses 1% of all wood harvested per year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, but they also produce like most of the world's furniture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Probably have a
Apple.
good exchange rate on how much wood is going into each piece of furniture because most of it is literally air.
Yeah, I mean that's the fiberboard they use. Just make your own furniture.
You can make your own furniture. I'm not saying it's not going to be a 500 pounds heavy, but
Those epoxy table videos.
yeah.
Dude, I love those. I kind of want to make one, but at the same time, I know it's probably gonna like turn out really bad.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably look into it.
Yeah, if I was actually good at woodworking, I might do it. If we make one, and if you and I make one together, that's gonna be the official studio.
Yeah.
So it's finally time that I reference the song that I put in as an intro out of nowhere last week, and I'm gonna do that in the future. So it's called "The Debate Is Over If You Want It" by Anti-Flag, and it talks about how you shouldn't take climate change to be something that's completely on your back. One of the lyrics is, "So just change the light you buy, or just change the car you drive, but don't change the makeup of their economy." And it's a really good narrative saying that you shouldn't accept that the climate crisis is on your back, and that you should, yes, fight for change, but you shouldn't be struck down by it. And unsurprisingly, the main contributors to anti-climate change lobbying, BP, Total, Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Saudi Aramco, but that's not on there. Pretty much all of them are doing some type of anti-climate change lobbying because that's their business.
Yeah. It's their livelihood. If climate change lobbying succeeds, then their livelihood goes away.
So it's time we talk about greenwashing. So greenwashing and net zero promises. They're afraid of the R word. Can you guess what the R word is? Regulation. They are terrified of a
Oh.
carbon tax. They will do literally anything to prevent a carbon tax. So whether that's lobbying or changing their logos to green or making this BP tweet that never ceases to make me laugh.
Yeah.
I
Hiring a social
pledge
media editor that can just tell people to be environmentally conscious is a lot cheaper than paying for every ton of carbon.
I pledge not to spill 4.9 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. You know what? I do too.
Yeah,
I think
do
I
too.
think it's I think with the global climate change the way it is, I think it's time that I stop my favorite summertime activity,
I
which
guess
is
I'll just have
buying.
to replan my Saturdays, I suppose.
I like the fact that if this was like mid 2020, you could get paid for spilling 4.9 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of
Oh
Mexico.
yeah, I was just talking about that the other day when the oil barrel price got down to like negative $40.
So the reason for that is because once you open an oil well, you can't stop it without destroying it. Once
Yeah,
you plug it up with concrete, you can't use it anymore. So they had to keep extracting oil even as demand went basically down to nothing. So then the price got negative.
it
And then you literally had like Joe Suburbia go out in his pickup truck and like buy a few drums of oil.
and then take a photo of the gas meter, entirely disregarding how the economy works and just blaming it all on Biden.
Yeah. The gas price go up button.
If the gas price goes up 1 cent despite the global economic surrounding, I will
So
blame this entirely on Biden.
when I was biking through like middle of nowhere California, there was this gas station that was like someone's house, and there was like one pump outside. Guess what gas was?
What?
$7.50.
That's actually, I might know the one you're talking about. There's a really famous one in a remote town in California that always has incredibly high gas prices because no one else can really go anywhere.
It was about 50 miles north of Fort Bragg, if that's any help.
Let's see. It's in Gorda, California.
Florida. Unless it's like
Oh.
immediately on the coast, it wasn't it. Oh, it is.
Okay.
That. No, that wasn't it.
Mm.
It was close though.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was more than one.
Hey, I
gas
definitely biked past that.
Yeah.
All right, so then we got, the Bic Eco or like Coke and Pepsi changing their labels to green. It's giving you the impression that it's greener when it's actually not.
Yeah.
So then net zero promises. Why is it that every company and their dog has promised net zero by 2030 or 2040, or Amazon and Apple going net zero by 2030, and like Google having already done so and then purchased its carbon emissions back before it was founded, which is cool. But they're scared of a carbon tax. They're scared of actually being charged on the carbon they're emitting, because carbon right now is free to emit. And they're taking every advantage because climate change is popular. We'll get into that later, but it's preventing climate change is a popular opinion now. So these companies will do what they can to get there. So then why is it that airlines are promising net zero when literally their entire business is and cannot be replaced by electric whatever? We'll get into that, but what they're using is biodiesel, and then purchasing the carbon dioxide offsets through that. And air
Nice.
travel is one of those essential industries that, although it can be scaled back, it probably will not stop.
It's part of that last 10% we were talking about a few episodes
Yeah.
ago, where it's going to get really exponentially harder to get rid of, climate change produced by gases emitted from concrete.
Yeah. And then at that point, there's also the what can the Earth naturally absorb on its own?
Yeah.
Which is part of that. So then why is it that oil companies are investing money into carbon capture? It's because that is their freaking salvation. Carbon capture is their last ditch effort to continue drilling that world ruining goop out of the atmosphere. Sorry, out of the earth.
If they can find a viable carbon capture, that means that they don't have to change anything about what they do. They
And
just build more of these like Bitcoin mining operations in the middle of the desert.
yeah, carbon capture is basically there's two types. One is more useful than the other. So you have this kind of like ambient air capture, which is it's in the middle of nowhere, and it just captures carbon dioxide was in the air at that location. Or it's direct air capture from power plants, which is a lot more useful.
Yeah.
And what they do is, they have what comes out of this after using a shit ton of electricity is kind of a carbon dioxide slurry that they can just pump underground into stable like bedrock, and then it's just there forever. And that is actually there forever. It's not nuclear waste there forever. Like, you're done with it at that point.
Yeah, they're just forcibly sequestering carbon.
Yeah, and this isn't the picture of it, but the biggest carbon capture plant that is like this one, so it's not hooked up to any emissions directly. But it just went online, and in 1 year, it will negotiate 3 seconds of humanity's carbon dioxide.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what? Let's see.
Again,
525,600 minutes in a year.
Mhm. Seasons
Um,
of love.
60. So we got about 31.5 million seconds. Divide that by the 3 seconds this took off. We need about 10.5 million of these plants.
Yeah, that's
Is that even
10.5
feasible
billion.
with the amount of land on the earth?
Wait. If it's negotiating 3 seconds, wouldn't you need less than that? So how many seconds are in a year?
31.5 million.
So it would be like 10 million. I thought you said 10 billion.
No, 10 million.
Yeah, okay, yeah, 10 million. That sounds right. I mean, yeah, but again, that's not the solution, because if this plant on its own is negotiating more than 3 seconds worth, but it's offset by the amount of power it's consuming, so that's the net reduction.
Who even
Um,
knows if this thing's helping climate change?
Not really. Again, it's going to be good for when humanity gets to that point where it's eliminated everything except the bare essentials of what carbon needs to be emitted, and then that's what this will actually be practical for. It's not oil's last ditch attempt to avoid responsibility.
Yeah.
And a lot of tech companies are behind this, and a lot of oil companies are behind this. But we're talking about that essential last part of carbon emissions. Here it is, and here's some solutions. So this is in Chicago. Just wanted to put this to show cars and trucks. The headline of this Chicago Tribune article was Chicagoans lose about 138 hours of their life per year in traffic.
Yep.
I
That was
believe that,
me driving back home from Champaign yesterday.
dude. Yeah, I-57, just everyone wants to kill you.
I-57 is either people coming in from Memphis that literally like were born on a hay bale, or people that are trucking all the way across 57 and maybe like cross over east or west, and those truckers go so insanely slow.
Nice. We have this ship, the lovely Ever Given. So you think that cars and trucks are the things doing the emissioning? The 50 largest container ships altogether emit more carbon dioxide than all of the Earth's cars and trucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But ultimately
They're the most efficient form of transportation by a
the
lot.
unit rate of actual carbon emission per, shipment container of goods that are shipped is so good compared to everything else.
Yeah, because this might be emitting this isn't the largest one, that would be the MSC Oscar. It might be emitting like millions of tons of carbon dioxide a year, but every run it's transporting about like 20,000 containers. And then the logic for carbon emissions is that boats are better than trains, are better than cars and trucks. So trains, you might only have like 2 or 3 5,000 horsepower engines, but you're kind of doing, I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
a tenth of this. You've been doing a tenth of one of these ships here. But obviously, boats can't go over land.
Yeah.
And so boats, what they've always used is bunker fuel, which is a highly sulfurous, like insanely poisonous fuel that the global shipping industry is phasing out in favor of just, regular diesel. But the solution for these planes, trucks, and trains, if they can't go electric, because let's face it, these boats aren't going to be having like millions of tons of batteries in their hulls. What they're probably going to end up using is biodiesel. So biodiesel is either used vegetable oil or, vegetable oil made for the process. And then it's kind of fermented and processed. I don't quite know how. And then you can put that into vehicles. It's cool.
Yeah.
And then trains, the other interesting solution that I saw to them were hybrid trains. So the principle of a hybrid car is that you have a gas engine, and if it's a plug-in hybrid or not, if it's not, then you don't actually have a way to charge the battery on its own. But the reason why they're so much more efficient is because when you're braking, instead of that energy going into the brake pads, it's heat, it's being used to charge a battery that you can use to supplement the gas engine. So you're capturing that energy that you would have otherwise lost as heat from braking. So you're using the same principle on a train. So you might have 4 or 5 regular diesel engines and then one of these hybrid engines. So they can capture the energy lost from braking, put it in a battery, and then help the train along when it's just moving. Which a couple of them are in use. Amtrak bought a bunch of them. But they're going to be a pretty good solution to help get that train thing down. And then trucks, some of them biodiesel, some of them electric. So there's a solution to all of it without just saying you need to get rid of it.
You can't get rid of it, is the problem.
Yeah, you can't. There is
just
literally nothing that you own in your house or that you've ever seen that hasn't been on a truck.
Yeah.
And I'd wager that over 50% of what you own goes through or has been in at some point Terminal Island in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
It is the second largest, interestingly, port in the United States. Basically, anything coming from Asia to the U.S. goes through there.
Interesting.
It's nuts. So you may be able to do all this, and climate change emissions may be going down, but there's something that we have in America and a few places in the world that make it kind of hard to act quickly. And that would be democracy and our lovely red tape. So
We love our red tape.
you have countries like, lovely China. I don't know what this says. I just thought it was a funny poster. But this is the People's National Congress, or I don't quite know what it's called, but will you look at that majority?
It's quite a majority you got there, Z.
That majority ain't moving. That
Yeah.
ain't moving. Yeah, I wonder how many members of the Taiwan Democratic Self-Government League are going to end up in the concrete foundation of a building.
Yeah, they're gonna get Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah. Some of
Did you watch
these
The
some of these
Irishman?
parties are kind of interesting. Like I kind of wonder how some of these parties are even like allowed to run.
Yeah.
Maybe if it's just like China knows that they're never going to have a majority anyway, so they just let them
Like-
run to give the appearance of like a republic. I don't know.
the Taiwan Democratic Self-Government League probably makes such a little difference in terms of
It's
policy
13
making
members, yeah.
that yeah.
Yeah, China's an interesting case. Again, I'm not out here taking AP CompGov. I know that it's not really a democracy as we would define it here in the States, but so this is the UK House of Commons, and then this is the 117th Congress of the US of A. And party affiliation aside, they run on tight majorities. So in a not so republic, you run by large majorities and then very small opposition. And then in republics, you run by very tight majorities. And change in republics happens, and it usually happens in the right direction, although it's slow. It is very slow. Like
I just
China,
translated that poster.
what's it say?
Shatter the old world, create a new world.
Based?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we want. Anyway, so you got climate change is a hard problem to solve, especially when you can't act unilaterally. And the problem is, even if you have a party that's really has no opposition, they're probably not going to use that power for climate change. They're probably going to use that power more so for making sure that people can't speak up against it than using that power for good. And there's a danger in collectivism, and that's China's national spirit. America's national spirit is individuality. China's would be that of collectivism. So their country can act more for the good of the whole country. So they can shut down their entire economy pretty much with no opposition or fear of retribution. When the US, if you even say anything about vaccine mandates, you're gonna die. Your party's dead in the water.
Yeah.
Americans don't like being told what to do. Not at all. You got anything to say about that?
Not particularly. I kind of just agree with you on what you said. But there's not really much else to tag on to that.
So now let's talk about government, what people see as government overreach. And I gotta say that water restrictions are not overreach. Water restrictions are some of the most drastic measures that residents will see because of climate change. And California has without question the strictest water restrictions for its residents. And I don't know, use a broom to wash down your driveways. Don't allow runoff. Don't wash your car with a hose. Don't operate fountains unless the water is recirculated. Hotels and restaurants can't give you towels and water unless you ask for it. you know,
Yeah, these are just typical things.
do any of those sound like 1984 government overreach?
It's not going to be bad.
No. Nah, it's basic stuff that, once you get used to it for like a month, it's just second nature. It's like once you learn how to recycle, you aren't like, God, recycling is such an inconvenience. No, you know how to do it now, so it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
So the American right and most conservatives around the world have long relied on, what do you mean? There's nothing happening. Why would we why would we do this? Like, why would we try to solve climate change when nothing's happening? And I think the last 2 summers, and we'll get more into it, but the last 2 summers have shown with destructive force that climate change is here. The Kyoto agreements were some of the first kind of, hey, climate change is maybe something we should start to consider in the mid 90s. And at that point, there was pretty much there's no effects of climate change that were tangible yet. But some people knew it was coming. And at this point, it's pretty obvious. And the American right and a lot of other people around the world can't keep saying that for much longer because it's affecting you now. It was easy when it was maybe some third world country having a flood, but now when it's entire towns being destroyed by wildfires or floods, or a freaking hurricane coming through the Gulf, traveling over land over 1,000 miles, and then killing like 50 more people in a completely different part of the country. Once shit like that starts happening, it's kind of hard to deny that something is afoot.
Yeah, there's situations already where we can see that there might have to be climate refugees.
Oh yeah,
The entire nation of Marshall Islands is at a maximum 6 feet above sea level.
even if all carbon emissions stop right now, the Marshall Islands is still not going to exist by the end of the century.
Yeah.
Humanity right now is locked into about 4 feet of sea level rise. No matter what we do. Interestingly, most of that is from the volume of the water increasing because it's warmer, not necessarily because of more ice melting.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. But so we got a few graphs here. We don't need to go into all of them, but this graph right here is kind of showing that climate change is affecting you in some way. So it is now a minority in people who are saying that climate change isn't affecting me. Why should I need to worry about it? People saying that, oh, more hot weather, floods, harm to animal wildlife, damages to forests, droughts or water shortages, wildfires, eroding beaches. These are things that people are saying affects them now. And because of that, there's now a majority of Americans, 63%, which is actually a very good majority in America, who say that stricter environmental regulations are worth the cost. So whether that's small economic setbacks or more taxes. And it is now a very popular majority of people who agree that either the world isn't doing enough to fight climate change, or that policies, we need to prioritize environmental policies. And this is in the US, a country that's famous for the impact of climate change on it being very small compared to other countries.
Yeah, in
So-
terms of our in-touchness with the issue, I'd say it's very low.
Yeah. So this picture is kind of misleading. It's not what America could look like in 2100. It is what America would look like if all of the ice on Earth melted, which
Yeah.
is even if we burned every scrap of plant life, oil, and natural gas in the ground, it would never get to that point. But this is an interesting photo just to show what areas are most vulnerable. So Florida is gone. Florida on average is about 50 feet above sea level. And as you can see, even if we limit global temperature rise to about 2 degrees Celsius, Miami and most of the Everglades underwater. New Orleans is completely no way going to make it to 2100. Like
They're
that
already-
it is a flat piece of land that is sinking, even though
they're
it is
already
2
having
feet above
trouble
sea level.
staying above water as it is.
Yeah, and they're having to build billion-dollar pumping plants to lower the level of the Mississippi River so it won't die during a storm. and all of the Mississippi River Basin and all of the Central Valley of California would be underwater if all of the ice on Earth melted. Again, that's not going to happen, but just an interesting way to show what areas are most vulnerable. Interestingly enough, Badwater Basin will be completely unaffected. Death Valley, the lowest point in America, 200 something feet below sea level, was going to be totally fine. Don't worry about that one.
Interesting.
See, what I have an interesting idea, and I haven't heard a lot about this, but is a last ditch attempt to stop climate change or stop sea level rise from getting bad is to find areas like Badwater Basin that don't harbor a diverse enough ecosystem that you can build a canal to flood it and lessen the impact of sea level rise. Again, that is not a solution by any means, but is that even possible?
It's quite the idea.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Despite so the Badwater Basin in Death Valley is like 300 something miles inland.
Yeah.
So that's kind of infeasible, but I'm sure there's areas around where there's a significant area that is very far below sea level that is kind of close to the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what various legislators, lawmakers, policy issuers have to think about solutions like that when it gets more serious.
Yeah. So at this point, we have climate change 1, America 0. So
yeah.
interestingly, the last 2 summers, summer of 2020 and 2021, is a sneak peek. They have been insane natural disasters. These are a list of natural disasters that have been over $1 billion in damages, and that's kind of a good litmus test for the severity of weather events. So unless it says earthquake, you can bet that it's because of climate change. Earthquake is pretty much the only natural disaster that hasn't been made worse by climate change. Earthquake or volcano.
Yeah.
Yeah, so at least in 2020, you had wildfires, you had that derecho that happened, that like insane storm that happened in the Midwest last summer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was actually caught outside during that. A tree fell over right next to me.
Whoa.
It was terrifying. So then just a bunch of tornadoes, you had a very, very, very busy storm season, especially in the Gulf. That wasn't even that bad this year. And then this year, obviously you had some flooding in Southern California during the end of last wet season. You had wildfires, you had droughts, you had more hurricanes, you had flooding. You name it, America has dealt with it. And this is a graph of billion-dollar disaster events throughout the year. So, obviously most years they kind of peak in the late summer and fall, and then kind of not much during the summer and spring. Sorry, winter and spring. But every year, this is from 1980 to 2021, but as you can see, every year it creeps up a little bit. It's been creeping up. So more billion-dollar disasters have been happening.
Yeah,
And
that's a dangerous trend for us to continue on.
2017 was kind of an outlier. I don't quite know what happened in 2017 that made it that bad. But
It might have just
this-
been the nature of the disaster.
yeah, this green line here is 2020, and this red line here is 2021. So this graph's a little old. It is only data going to late August, but we're well on track to outpace 2020 by a lot.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the situation we're in right now. Again, I think that the only way for climate change to actually be solved was to allow it to get bad enough so that people would see it's actually a problem.
It's an unfortunate nature of the situation, but that is
And
the
it-
situation we are in.
And it appears to be working, question mark. I think people are finally starting to wake up.
It's
And
finally not just a field of science inhabited by very niche scientists, climatologists, and Jimmy Carter.
yeah, if you look through history though, if you look at, I don't know, the threat of Nazi Germany or whatever else, people always dismiss the threat is nothing or overblown until it got so bad that you couldn't ignore it anymore, and it was knocking at your door. And then you finally did the work to repel it, and guess what? You did. So I'm hoping that's what climate change goes into the history books as.
Yeah.
Because life will carry on, regardless of how badly we fuck up the planet. Just will we be around to see that?
Life finds a way.
Yeah, the Earth is developing a fever to kill off the germs.
Yep. And
Yep.
sometimes we're the germs.
Sometimes we are the germs. So next episode, we're going to get into a fun little history of Western U.S. droughts since about 9,000 years ago, when soil samples first started becoming possible.
Yep.
We're going to get into, how droughts are a natural fixture of the Western U.S. and how they're getting worse.
Yeah.
That's it. That's a podcast, and that was a marathon episode. Goodness. It was long.
Yeah. Wow.
The slides are actually pretty easy to make for this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I kind of just like, I whip these out in like 2 hours. It usually takes me like 3.
Yeah.
Any shout outs before we go?
Let's see. Shout outs. Shout out to Jimmy Carter, I suppose.
Yes, and Richard Nixon,
Richard Nixon.
but only for one thing,
Ah.
the EPA. With the
True.
coolest 70s logo.
Richard Nixon creating the EPA is like Hitler making the Autobahn. It's just
I don't know if those are quite comparable.
it's a person who was notoriously horrible in their policy making,
Mm-hmm.
making a surprisingly good policy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's problematic to compare anyone to Hitler because it either brings them up to the level of Hitler or brings Hitler down to the level of them.
We're
But-
gonna get canceled before we even get 10 subscribers. Is that what you want?
Hashtag canceled. This is white America.
The United Snakes of America. All
Yeah.
right. Is that all?
Yep, I mean, that'll be it.
This is
All right,
on
that's
your
the podcast.
back.
I'll see
The
ya.
point of contention is how they act. Where you draw the line will set you free. The debate is over.